I had a trainer years ago, and I realized that I work out more when I have a trainer. He's pushing me, and he's making do things I don't want to do. I don't necessarily want to do 5 more reps of something. But the trainer, the teacher, the coach, that's what they do. They see something that you're able to do, and they make you do it, or they encourage you to do it. They can't make you do anything. At any time, I can walk out of the gym and say, no, not doing that. But there's something about this person thinking you're capable of doing it. I think I started working out with a trainer for the same reason that I love having a coach. I love learning, playing for people and getting feedback on my playing. It's for the same reasons. It's curiosity, accountability, motivation, inspiration, all of these things.
Hey everybody, this is Chris from honestypill.com. You're listening to episode 9 of the Honesty Pill podcast. This season on the show, I'll be talking to innovative musician entrepreneurs who have created new ways of performing, new ways of teaching, and new ways of serving their audiences. My guest today is violinist, teacher, and performance coach, Dr. Renée-Paule Gauthier. This was such an awesome episode. We got into so many topics like why it's so important to invest in yourself, and that it's totally okay to ask for help on your projects, your career, or anything that you're working on. We'll talk about how to shift your focus to things you can actually have some control over, and how Renée was so dedicated to learning about becoming a better musician and teacher, she went out and got a DMA in mindful practice. By the way, she did that while raising 2 kids and holding down a busy freelance career in Chicago. So all of you music students, get ready to take some notes on how you can work a Google Calendar and become a more efficient learner. By the way, towards the end of this interview, you might hear Renée's kids calling out in the background while they enjoy some video games, but I didn't want to edit it out because it really is just the times we're living in right now, trying to work from home with kids during a pandemic. My kids are in the background right now. Hopefully they won't come barging through the door. So you are not alone, musician, entrepreneur, parents. We totally feel you. All right, get yourself a warm winter coat because we're heading to Chicago for this episode. Let's dig in. So good to have you on the show, Renée. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you and I are a great example of yet another professional working relationship that we're in a really strange time where people don't get to hang out and the connectivity is basically gone between people working together, musicians working together. But because of the teaching and coaching circles that you and I are in, we see each other almost every week. And sometimes I forget the fact that you and I have actually never met, have we?
That's so true, yes.
Let's talk about that connection, actually, and how it's impacted your work as a musician. I mean, you play regularly with the Chicago Lyric Opera, the Joffrey Ballet, you play with the Chicago Symphony, and all that has been completely shut down for, what are we going on, month 8 here? I can't even remember how long it's been. How have you been balancing that as a musician and also just in your own life? How's it been for you?
Well, I guess there's always the silver lining, right? It was interesting the other day. I actually started thinking about how I would feel the first time going on stage after this is over. And I bursted, and I started crying. I was just overcome by emotions. So I cannot wait. And at the same time, I feel like as a maybe coping mechanism or call it survival mode, I really choose to focus on the things that I can control. And for me, it has been allowing my creativity to come out in a different way, which was to finally create the coaching business I had been dreaming about for years, create the online coaching program I had been dreaming about for years. So this time has allowed me to do this. And you were talking about connection, and I really feel like a beauty of social media in general, there's a lot of ugly stuff about it, but a beauty about it is it has, in my opinion, really created a connection between amateurs, professionals, performers, teachers in the way that maybe we weren't in contact in that way before. I have made friends in all sorts of different circles, and it has fueled my inspiration so much to be reading about these wonderful amateurs, these wonderful adult beginners, these motivated parents of youngsters learning and how they're going through this journey. And of course, now that we're all home and kind of, holding on for dear life to the posts and the internet connections that we have, I really have felt a strengthening of those connections. So the silver lining is how the community has come together and how it has allowed so many of us to create new things, create new business opportunities, create new ways of interacting and new ways of presenting music. So for me, it's been focusing on the silver lining, but I do miss performing.
Oh, it's a good optimistic mindset to jump into. And I've also been trying to focus on the benefits. With the bigger the challenges that we face, the more opportunities come with them. So, and also even yesterday, I did a coaching with some non-music major, non-professional bound musicians who are just playing because they love it. And that's not a group that I would normally be put in front of. But because of this connectivity and the fact that people are reaching out and asking, hey, can you come and talk to my students? I was able to connect. In fact, it was one of the most fun coachings I've done in a while, because they're in it purely for the passion and the joy and the self-mastery, and they're not necessarily in it because they want to go to Juilliard. By the way, speaking of schools, I didn't really properly introduce you. We're speaking with Dr. Gauthier, and I want to talk a little bit about your educational background. How did you get that doctor? Are you a veterinarian, dentist? What's the background?
No, I'm a DM, and we joke around the house because my husband has a PhD in physics, so we're a bunch of doctors. I went to what I really find interesting is I did my undergrad in Montreal. I'm French Canadian, so if I say anything funny, I blame it on that. And did my master's at Eastman, and then I went on and had a career for about 10 years, and always wanted to do a doctorate, but never really. It really was never in the card. And then at some point, the vision came so strongly, the desire to do the doctorate, which coincided with when I moved to Chicago. So I applied to Northwestern, got in, and it was just so excruciatingly wonderful. And, doing a doctorate meant a lot of sacrifices. I already had children at this point, long commutes. But to have this opportunity to really take a deep dive in all of these topics and really go deep in all of it, history, theory, musical concepts, and do the research that I had it's going to sound tacky, but I really had it in my heart. I wanted to research mindful practice, ways to help my students. I was really on a mission to figure out a system to help my students and help myself and my colleagues. So that's how the doctorate happened for me.
Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that mindful practice in a minute, but let me just backtrack a little bit. You actually got your doctorate completed while you had kids. So that's not a small thing. How do you juggle a massive goal like that and still maintaining a life?
Google Calendar.
Me too.
Yes, I really plan everything. It was really essential for my survival back then. And I did have my moments when I got sick and burned the candles by both ends and, exhaustion came in. But I think that I was driven by the mission. I also am a huge nerd. So just going to class is always fun for me. And then you figure out all sorts of ways. Well, you don't have time to read these 5 books on, Brahms' life, but you can check out the audiobook from the library and listen to it during your 2-hour commute. So I think what made the difference for me is that I took complete charge of my learning experience because I was a mother and I was busy. I had no time to waste at all. I never left the class with a question pending. I always ask questions in class. If I felt like getting guidance from a tutor or a TA, I never used TAs before, but they're there for you. If you're in college and there's a TA in your class and they have office hours, go to the office hours. If your teacher has office hours, go to the office hours. And so I started to utilize the resources that were available to me so that I didn't have to figure things out on my own at home. I could just get all the answers to all the questions I had and have clarity on everything that I needed to do. I tried to memorize my music in the car, listening to it. Still have to pay attention to the road a little bit, but, and just was pulling out all of the tricks I knew about how to practice mindfully and learn quickly. So I really got to apply what I was studying as I was studying it. And like I say, It was excruciatingly wonderful because I love learning and it required a lot of sacrifices. But because I think my mission was so clear for me, my purpose was so clear, you just hold on and make it happen.
You said something that kind of got buried in there, but I want to highlight it, is that about, hey, if somebody who has a brilliant insight or you're trying to learn from is holding office hours, go to the office hours. If they wrote a book, read the book. In other words, what you're saying is something, it's a theme that has come back again and again, both in my own teaching, in my own coaching, in the coaching that I receive, is if you want to be successful, you have to show up. You just have to show up. That's literally the difference between, all right, I mean, let's put it this way. There's a big gap between successful and not successful. There's many things that could make that happen. Lack of skill, lack of focus, lack of vision, all those things. But the difference between successful and really successful, or successful and satisfied and fulfilled, is literally just showing up. The more you show up, the more you do the things, the more you get results, and you can actually track that. And it sounds like that's been natural for you in your learning as well. Clearly, if you've accomplished the things you've accomplished while maintaining a family and a life and, physical fitness, I know we're going to talk about that later. It's impressive, Renee, really. And not many people actually think about that in terms of how do you create that success every time?
Absolutely. Yes. I think that that would be my number one advice to anyone embarking on any journey, is if you can get support, guidance, please do it. Also, I want to say I'm a coach. I have a coach, and it's worth every penny I spend on it. It's the support, the guidance, the time saved, the inspiration, the motivation, all of those things. That's what we get from our, violin lessons. We do invest in ourselves. So what I think is, when you invest yourself as well. So I would say, if there are resources available for you, either free or something that would bring so much value to your life, it's probably worth investing.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot on this podcast. That professional athletes and actors can use coaches. You can use a coach as well. I want to ask you a little bit about something I read on your website, and that's this idea that when people want to make something happen, if it's getting a certain job or achieving a certain level of income or just getting better at playing their instruments, but they're actually not holding a mental space for the reality of it, but end up just sort of going through mindless action. You talk about this in terms of something you call default mode, just like moving the bow across the string for hours without intention or awareness of what they're actually trying to achieve. Can you unpack that a little bit? Because I think that is a typical trap that people fall into, musicians, non-musicians, of forgetting what it is that they're actually doing. Are their efforts aligning with the goals?
That's such a good point. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I was talking about it yesterday in our group coaching, actually, and it's that concept that you can move your arms around for an hour holding a violin and still get no results at all. So it starts with that purpose, really knowing where you're aiming and then bringing your focus to that action. Because when you don't have that target in mind, then what is the effort for? I see this in students so much, where with intended effort, they could accomplish so much in 10 minutes, but they let's say they come back the next week and have not been able to solve an issue because they were just standing there, moving their right arm right and left, up and down, and some fingers wiggling on the left side. It's not the same thing. There really needs to be a purpose. I mean, I bring it to fitness. If you can lift 2 pounds easily, I don't care if you do 45 reps, you're not going to build muscle. It's kind of the same thing with practicing. There needs to be a purpose, and there needs to be an intent. So if there's that presence, that intent, the focus, and you marry that with curiosity, knowledge, information, then you can really progress a lot faster.
And that's the key, isn't it? That intellectual curiosity. And this might be a newsflash, but when you go to college, your job isn't to sit there and take the information that is given to you. Your job is to ask questions. Your job is to question your teacher, respectfully, of course. But the job isn't, hi, I'm here to show up, you tell me all the answers, because I have bad news for you. The people who are teaching at your college were one-time college students who didn't have the answers. And the way that they figured them out was by asking questions, by experimenting, by failing, by making mistakes, by learning from those. And I'll be totally honest with you, since we're here on the Honesty Pill podcast, here's my Honesty Pill moment is I did do that when I went to grad school. I just said, all right, tell me what to do and I'll do it. And that works sometimes. And sometimes it really doesn't work. So the questioning and the knowing what it is you're trying to achieve is really critical. And this isn't just limited to musicians practicing, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's so true what you said, because was I always a perfect student? No, for sure. I mean, a big thing about me is as a kid, my mother practiced with me. That's how I learned to practice mindfully, is that someone was guiding every single movement I made for hours every day. Then I went to college and I figured out there were two ways of practicing. I realized I was practicing two ways. There's time I would punch in time in the practice room. And then there's other times when I had a jury coming up or a competition or an audition, and my brain was on fire when I was practicing. And it felt like a great workout at the end. And I realized, wait, I should practice like this all the time. Why am I not doing that? And then I did exactly what you're saying. You just wait for the information to come to you and you don't really make anything with it. When I went to Northwestern for my doctorate, it was different. My teacher would come and I'd show up to my lesson with had little sticky tabs all over the music and lists of questions, and he would get really excited. He was like, "So great, you've got all these questions." And I was like, "Well, I want these answers." I really got curious, really curious. I think curiosity is asking the right questions will take you somewhere wonderful.
Oh, that's a great quote. I love that. One of the things that comes up on this show a lot is the parallel between practicing an instrument and exercise, as far as like athletics. Running has come up a lot in this podcast. And I know that you are a person who really enjoys going to the gym. And, you know, in addition to not working with Chicago Lyric or the Chicago Symphony, you've also not been able to go to the gym. So we're talking in the time of pandemic for anyone listening to this in the future. And gyms are one of the places, that's like the last place you want to be right now. How have you been balancing that? And I want to talk about why you like that form of exercise, how you've made that work for you, and sort of the structure of it.
Yes. I was never an active child. And when I went to New World Symphony, I discovered a lot of things that changed my life. So a lot of what I do today is directly influenced by the lifestyle I had while living in South Beach. I started running by the ocean every day. It was my moment. I discovered yoga. I discovered meditation. I discovered the principle of paying myself first. And by that, I mean, it takes some time every morning to meditate, get some really good practice done, so that by 10 a.m. when the rehearsal starts, I've already done a lot of stuff for me ahead of time. Now, sure, with reality, with kids, commute, can you always do that? No, but you can try to plan for it and incorporate it. So now with COVID, I didn't go to the gym for a while, but then after a couple months, I called my trainer and I said, well, I'm someone who needs accountability and this is not happening here. So we started training online, violin lessons online. Why not? Why FaceTime workout? And I can guarantee you that I will not do 12 push-ups by myself here, but if he's yelling at me on the other side nicely, I will make it.
Yes, we all need that extra motivation. What made you get a trainer for the first time? And did you go to the gym for a period without a trainer and just sort of wander around?
Absolutely. I had a trainer years ago and I realized that, well, that's no big surprise to you. I work out more when I have a trainer. He's pushing me and he's making do things I don't want to do. I don't necessarily want to do 5 more reps of something. I don't like burpees. But the trainer, the teacher, the coach, that's what they do. They see something that you're able to do and they make you do it, or they encourage you to do it. They can't make you do anything. Anytime I can walk out of the gym and say, no, not doing that. But there's something about this person thinking you're capable of doing it and you getting curious about, am I? Can I really? Do I really have one more in me? And then you're like, well, I think maybe it won't be pleasant, but I can do it. So I think I started working out with a trainer for the same reason that I love having a coach. I love learning, playing for people and getting feedback on my playing. It's for the same reasons. It's curiosity, accountability, motivation, inspiration, all of these things.
If I could ask you to put a percentage on these two things, what would you say? On one side, it's the trainer telling you, here are the exercises, here's how you do them, here's the mistakes to avoid. And on the other side of the percentage would be the motivation. Like when you show up at the gym and you're tired and you're dragging and you don't want to be there, and they meet you at the front door and they say, I got you, let's go. And they just motivate you through it. What percentage would you say that would be for you?
I think that there are days where with all of the information, I could do it. But the thing is, with the person waiting there at the door, it's, you can talk yourself out of practicing working out so easily. If the person's there, I think it's going to be 99% motivation, inspiration. For me, it makes a huge difference. I mean, yes, we practice every day for sure. So I don't need someone to stand next to me to practice every day. So maybe I could rethink my percentage if I am to think about it very carefully. Because when it comes to practicing, there's the goal, how meaningful what you're trying to accomplish is, that brings you back to the practice room. But having said that, would I practice better with someone watching over me all the time? Probably. So the trick is, how can I make myself practice as if the coach is in the room? So there's a million tips we can do to do that. That's what I try to teach my clients and my students and myself, right? We're always our own best student.
Did you have a teacher who showed up for you more as a coach, motivationally, or more as an information provider?
That's really interesting. And that's also a big part of my story, is that the violin teacher I had between the age of 9 up to college, I studied with him for a long time because as we were working together, he started teaching at the college level, was almost like a second father to me. So he was a teacher with tons of knowledge and skills and abilities. And he was really good about giving out the information. But more than that, he was an extremely, and still is, an extremely passionate person. And someone who was pushing me to read books, experience things, to really live a rich life so that I have a rich experience to bring in the practice room. And he would, I mean, the lessons would be so energetic. It wasn't just like, listen if the note is in tune. You'd be like, no, let's listen to this note, this one note. Do you hear that? Do you hear that? Oh, that's amazing. And, like just kind of bringing such passion to his teaching, bringing the teaching to life, bringing the information to life, but also showing me that it's much more than the technique. The technique is important. You need the technique. But it really is a holistic thing with who you are also.
I think that's pretty rare. I think that most teachers, especially when you get to a conservatory level or a graduate level, the emphasis shifts more to the specific mastery of the instrument and technical things. I feel like there's less of a balance between mindset work and learning to shift yourself to balance and self-mastery, which are the things that kind of derail people when they're achieving big goals. Is they lose that balance. They lose the ability to create space for the other things that come into it. Look, when I coach audition strategy, yes, you need to master the notes, but it's almost 80% mindset work at this point, especially if you can already play. And I don't feel like that is common in most educational situations. It sounds like you had a lucky teacher.
Yes, I was really lucky with him. He was wonderful.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about when this journey for you, when your knowledge, experience, and all the things that you know, suddenly you woke up and said, wait a minute, I could make a business out of this. I could create a podcast. Let's talk about the Mind Over Finger podcast. First of all, how long ago did you start that? Talk a little bit about the challenges of launching a business.
Hmm. What's interesting is I never approached it from the idea of launching a business. It's almost as if it all unfolded organically. Originally, the I call it a mission, but that mission to help my students started a little bit as a blog. I mean, you probably feel that way too, where you have taught the same lesson 5 times in one day, and you think, if I could just put all of that in writing and say, go read this, it would be. So I started writing a little bit on my blog, and I'm a huge podcast fan because I spent so much time in the car, and I would, listen to all these awesome interviews, and I always had these questions running in my head, and I would go to rehearsals or concerts and have these awesome conversations with colleagues. And I always thought, I wish my students could hear this, or I wish I could ask this to this person. And then as it happens, I was in the circle where I saw someone launching a podcast, and I thought, wait, is that how it works? Like you can launch a podcast. Okay. And one day the idea came to me in a moment. I remember where I was. I remember what I was doing. And once it got a hold of me, it just never left. Because at first, right, when an idea comes, it sounds great. And then right away, your little ego speaks. And I don't mean ego as egotistical, but the part of you who wants to second guess everything. Who are you to start a podcast? That sounds hard. That sounds complicated. It's probably expensive. It's probably hard. And then, I don't know, there was something that just kept pushing me to say, well, maybe it's expensive, but let's research it. Is it? And I just kept on going ahead with those ideas and just kind of let it unfold. And with the coaching business, as a result of my doctoral research, I came up with what I call the deep practice model, which is a method and a system to teach my students and teach my clients how to practice more mindfully. And it's a combination of mindsets and systematic practicing techniques. And I just kept on thinking of ways that I could share that with more people. And at first, I would create syllabus and try to convince the schools where I teach to create courses for me. And then one day I realized, wait, I take online classes all the time. I buy online courses. Maybe there's something to it. And it quickly went from the idea of being a course to a coaching, because I really want to have this human interaction. The course is called the Music Mastery Experience because we really go through the experience together. There's an arc, there's a transformation that happens. So that's kind of how it unfolded. It really came from this first desire to solve that problem. How can I get my students to practice more mindfully, to progress faster? And I say practice and progress. All we want to do is perform better. That's the ultimate goal. Is all of this work is to allow us to step on stage and then be free. That's the point. But before that comes practicing mindfully, which originates in the mind. That's where mind over finger comes in, because one of my favorite saying from my teacher at Eastman's, V. Zeitlin, was technique is conception. He would say this all the time. Technique is conception. And technique allows you to express, but it starts with the idea. So everything that we execute on the instrument starts in our mind. Sure, our heart, we feel those emotions for sure, but it starts with the idea, both the idea of the ideal interpretation and the information on how to execute it. So mind over finger comes from that, and mind over matter. And so it all came from that desire to create this, to have a way to teach it, because that's the other thing too. When you have someone who doesn't know how to practice, that's something. But when you're also facing someone who is not used to paying attention, doesn't know how to listen, even experience physically what they're doing with their instrument, you want to figure out a way for them to have tools to go home and be able to do that as well. And then everything else kind of came from that.
I love the definition I heard once about technique is just learning how to move from one note to another. That's it. And the space in between our ears, where just moving from one note to the other, the limiting assumptions and the worry and the misinformation that can be created between those two notes is a world of misinformation. I'm not good enough. I don't have the right embouchure. My fingers are too fat. They're too thin. All this crazy stuff comes up just moving from one note to the other. And that's the crux of it, really. If you can boil down, what does that take physically on your instrument? And what does it take in your mind to calmly and without panic and without judgment move from one note to the other? Then you can develop technique. Oh, I love it. I want to ask you another sort of back office business question here. A few months ago, so I subscribed to your newsletter at Mind Over Finger, and I got an email from you announcing a training program you had coming up. And I have to say, Renee, this was the most stunningly beautiful lead magnet I've ever seen in my inbox. And before we talk about what you were thinking about when you made that, someone posted the question in one of our groups earlier this week: what is a lead magnet? Can you just explain like what that is for people who weren't familiar?
Yes. So a lead magnet, in my opinion, it could be described other ways by other people. In my opinion, is kind of a place where you distill information that could be of value to other people, and you offer it to them, oftentimes in exchange for an email address that allows you to keep sending them great material, great content, and keep them updated with what you do. Right now, I've created a few. I have a metronome guide, and I have the Joyful Practice Challenge also. And for me, it's just a place where you put information that is relevant and helpful for people to easily access it.
Right. So lead magnets are just one of the tools. And by the way, I just want to say one thing. A lot of the people who are listening to this podcast are probably considering stepping outside their role, their traditional role as a performing musician or just a teaching artist or a music educator, and maybe considering trying something new, finding new ways to bring their skills and their information to audiences. And one of the biggest areas of resistance that pops up is, I don't like to get in front of the camera. I don't like to sell things to people. It makes me feel tacky, like a used car salesman. And I'm here to say, and this is why I brought up this lead magnet idea, is you can connect with a new audience in a way that is not high pressure or salesy or weird. It's literally just saying, hey, if this is interesting to you, let's have a conversation. Or if you'd like to dig deeper on this topic, I know about this. I'm available. Here's the one way you can connect with me. In fact, it was the metronome guide, by the way, that I got from you. It wasn't even, requesting any sort of action on my part. It was like, here's some information that I think is valuable to you. So the question really would be, what would you say being a musician and learning those skills, or being an athlete and going to the gym, that has helped you in your business development and just putting all this stuff together?
Oh, that's a good question. I think that you've probably heard this from everyone, but being a musician, there's this attention to detail. The other thing about musician is we often forget we've been taking private lessons for years, since we were children. So there's a knowing that we all have on how to transmit information, how to teach, this patience on how to develop a skill. So I think that on the human perspective, these are some qualities that I find are really helpful. And I know that for me, I always the another thing that was very significant in my life is that my mother was running a school of music, and I kind of grew up under her desk over there. So I've seen her organization was nonprofit, but I still would call that I've seen a woman entrepreneur all my life, working really hard, having ideas, figuring out ways to make them come to life. And I've always had kind of this inclination to start things. And so several years back, I started a chamber music festival. And I realized that oftentimes it starts with a question, sometimes a question to yourself, or sometimes a question you ask someone. In the case of this festival, we had one concert in this beautiful church in my hometown, which is such a vibrant musical universe. And I asked the councilman there, I was like, would you like for this to happen again? And he said, yes. And then we started to figure out how to do it. And that's how it starts. Like, an idea, a question, and then you peel the corner of the wrapping paper until, everything comes together or comes apart. But there's no need to tackle everything at once, and there's no need for perfection, and you pick a corner and you start pulling.
That's a huge topic too, about perfection. And every single guest I've had on the show, everybody I've coached and talked to, that is a topic that comes up a lot. And it's because of our training as musicians, where we're told to go in the room, lock the door, and make it perfect. And man, if that's been one lesson I keep learning over and over again, especially in the online business space. Your YouTube videos do not have to be perfect. Your email sequences do not have to be perfect. In fact, it's far more interesting to see somebody screw up than to see it perfect. It's just a theme that runs on this show a lot. I want to talk about music mastery experience a little, especially what you said about how that is the experience part. Good coaching is about transformation, not information, right? Talk to me a little bit about how you walk your clients through that experience.
Yes, I think that what's important is for everyone to connect to their own goals and their own purpose. And then from that, we establish some parameters. There's a performance at the end, and there's some guidance in terms of reverse engineering, the process, and a lot of information on how to practice and prepare for a performance. But a big, big thing is, and that's how I love to learn as well, is the coaching, coming together, unpacking the problems, sharing our obstacles. A big one is sharing our wins as well. What has worked well is seeing how those concepts that we talk about in the trainings, once you apply them in your practice, how people are experiencing the wins, the challenges. And even to go back to what we were talking about is when the teacher gives you a concept, what does that mean to you? There needs to be some introspection. You go back home, take out your instrument. What does that look for you? Because it's not the same for everybody. And we want to get curious and explore. And then you come together with your colleagues and your coach and unpack all of that and discuss it. So this is why I really love the coaching part of the program, because it's way beyond the ideas, the concepts, the methods, the systems, the techniques. It's really how once someone does the work, tries it, it's how it becomes part of who they are. And when everybody starts to share that, then it's really amplified between the members. So there's a lot of energy and motivation coming out of a group experience like this.
I found that to be true also. The synergy in a group experience is, you can't replicate that anyway, but you do private one-on-one coaching as well, don't you?
Yes, I do.
How could you describe the difference in those two, group coaching versus one-on-one? What are the challenges? What are the benefits? What's different for you?
I think that for some people, right, everyone's different. So not everyone enjoys sharing their experience with other people. So on a one-on-one, of course, everything is very targeted for that person. And at the same time, maybe someone feels comfortable going deeper, more personal issues, personal stumbling blocks that sometimes we're not 100% comfortable sharing in the group setting. But I think that both are wonderful. And what I like is when someone participates in my group program, in addition to this, they take private meetings as well. That really allows us to target all fronts.
Yeah, so you're kind of able to give them both benefits. And I think some people do open up more in a group because they see, hey, I'm not the only one suffering through this challenge, and other people want to work on that one-on-one. What's gotten easier over time for you as a coach and as a business person?
Trusting myself. It's really interesting how once we realize that we know so much more than we do, we're so much wiser than we think we are, and there's no need to be perfect, but we can accomplish so more when we go forward with this trust in ourselves. And we're usually much stronger, wiser than we think.
So what do you find is still a challenge for you or still hard for you?
Like you said, this is the honesty pill. So I'll be honest, everything. Because I think that the better we get at something, the further we can see in a way. I don't know if that's English, hopefully. But I think that it's never easy to put yourself out there, and you just got to keep doing it. So I don't want it to sound like it's hard, but I think that there's always going to be challenges. And I think that for me, at the end of the day, I'm always happy that I faced them and I kept going.
What would you say would be the one thing that you wish you had known when you started an online business that you know today?
You know, I've had business coaches for a long time now, but I wish I had gotten a coach earlier. I think that having this soundboard in your life is, I mean, if I'm being down to earth, it saves you time, it saves you energy, and it empowers you.
What's the difference between a life coach and a business coach for you? Or is there?
It's really interesting. I feel like at this point, they really merge for me right now. I do feel like the coach that I have right now really seems to be targeting, because the thing is that the happier you are as a human, the easier it becomes to do your business. But I do think that depending on the coach that you get, some people might be strictly business coaches where they show you how to do very specific things. And others would target all areas of your life. So some business coaches would help you strictly with starting your business.
You can hear Renee's children in the background. I just want to say that scream we just heard, which I have to leave in the show, just sort of like explains all of 2020 and how we're all feeling right now. So whoever just screamed there, I feel you. We're all screaming inside. All right. Well, and I'm sorry that I interrupted your stream of thought.
This is some Smash Bros action going on in the background.
Right. Look, this is actually a good place to pivot the question, because this is a big question right here. Okay. When you're working towards becoming a better musician, or if you are starting a business, it's really easy to look around and see other people who have already done what it is that you want to do, or are doing it a lot better, or have been doing it a lot longer. And it's really easy to start comparing and saying, well, somebody's already doing that, so why should I do it? And I think that's a challenge. What would you say to someone who's maybe shrinking away from that challenge because, look, how could I do it better than that person, or who should listen to me?
Right. I think that my answer is not going to be very original, and it might be one that you've heard before. And that's one that I've heard many times on other podcasts as well, is no one will do it your way unless you let yourself be influenced too much by what you see around. And I think that if someone really takes the time to slow down, sit in silence, reflect, and really start to create anything that it is that they want to create, a business, a coaching, anything, and create that from a place of knowing who they are, what they're trying to provide the world with, who they're trying to help, and doing this in the way that is really aligned and respectful of who they are, how they function, and what they think. I think it will be of tremendous value to anyone that they're trying to reach.
That's great advice. So one of the things that I like to do in this podcast when I notice a bookshelf behind my guest, so those of you listening obviously can't see this, but Renee has a massive collection of recordings and books right behind her. So I'm going to ask you, can you give me one recording that was influential to you or means a lot to you, and one book that you're either reading or have read that our listeners need to know about?
Yes, absolutely. So if you look on this side, you see all the chess books. Those are not mine. They're my husband's. Well, first of all, I think if people are listening to this podcast, they probably heard about the one that is the most prominent, which is the Mindset by Carol Dweck. And it's this idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. And I think this is so important. I probably think this is something that most musicians are aware of by now, I hope, is that it's not just about how talented you are, but if you use mind over finger, you can grow, you can learn, you can change your technique, transform your golf swing. Everything is possible. So this is one of my favorite. And then the other one is, there's many that I really love there, but there's talent is overrated. And this really talks so much about kind of similar concepts, but also the fact that there's so many more elements at play in how we're successful, how excellence shows up in our skills. So those are two books that I really, really recommend. And it's funny because I have so many CDs behind me, so many wonderful recordings of symphonies and anthologies and opera. And the first one that popped in my mind was the Red Hot Chili Peppers recordings that I loved as a teenager, because I remember playing some arrangement of it, I think in high school, and just, I don't know, it was for me such a moment that brought me so much joy in terms of branching out of classical music. So I don't know why this is the first recording that came to mind, but that's the one.
It's worth noting that this is the second time on this season that someone has mentioned the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So I mean, maybe there's some kind of honesty pill chili pepper correlation I need to know about. Renee, what was your biggest failure as a business person, and what did you learn from it?
You know what I would say is my biggest failure would be all the things I've never done because I was second guessing myself or afraid of failure. Now, the more I think about it, the more I think that the biggest failure is in not trying in the first place. Just letting fear of judgment stop you.
That's a great answer. And that's a pretty standard and common feeling that not taking the chance is worse than failing 100 times. And you're going to fail anyway. One of the challenges with putting together a course or any kind of online content is trying to make it perfect and worrying about failing. Look, you're going to make mistakes. In fact, that's not something to be avoided. It's actually something to lean into because that's going to impact and inform what it is that you're trying to do. Any other resources that have helped you along the way that you want to share with our listeners as far as coaching programs or recordings or books or things that you wished you'd have known about if you were just starting out today?
There's so many, it's hard to pick, but I would really encourage people. I'm like a broken record, but seek out guidance. Find a coach that can help you with whatever endeavor you're wanting to pursue. I'm a huge fan of audiobooks. I would say that reading and nowadays listening, as a parent, if I sit down to read, that's over. I'm asleep. But I can listen to books. Remaining curious, I would say, is really, really important. And as far as websites, and there's so many great resources that I would actually recommend people to don't look everywhere. Just pick a few sources and learn what you can from those before trying to learn from all of the other sources at the same time. It's overstimulating, it's overwhelming. So I would say, funnel it a little bit.
All right. As far as online learning and resources, I can't let you get off this call without giving us one of your favorite exercises we can do at home to stay in shape or to quiet our minds or something that you've gotten from your trainer.
Okay, from my trainer. Well, the first thing I'd say for my clients, my students, I talk a lot about priming. So before you play your first note in your practice room, take a second or take an hour, but do something to prepare your space, your mind, set your goals, get specific on what you're trying to accomplish, take a few breaths, give yourself some grace. And if you have time, yes, do sit down, do meditate for a few minutes. It's so helpful and it will transform your practice for sure. And then as far as exercise, I would say morning walk, bundle up. It's cold right now here in the Midwest. Bundle up, take a walk. And then if you have a chance later, a really good yoga session would help.
Brilliant. Renee, I hope that you and I are able to meet one day, and maybe even on the concert hall in Chicago. And I hope you get to go back to your gym soon. Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Everything Mind Over Finger. My website is mindoverfinger.com, and that's where you can find me also on Facebook, Instagram, and if you Google Mind Over Finger podcast, that's available everywhere as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me. And I would just want to say, as another parent who has children in the background homeschooling, I wish you peace and calm and quiet moments whenever you can grab them. And I really appreciate you taking the time to hop on the show today, despite all those challenges.
Thank you so much, Chris. It was so great to speak with you.
Thanks, Renee. Take care. big thanks to Dr. Renée-Paule Gauthier and her entire family for joining me on the show today. I hope you guys got some good ideas about how you can bring more mindfulness to your practice, your workouts, and maybe even a brand new online business. Before I sign off today, I hope these interviews are starting to get you thinking about where you are in your career right now, what your performance schedule looks like, how your teaching methods or studio have changed, and what your bank account looks like. Whether you're sitting in a full-time orchestra job, you're a freelance musician, or a music educator, there are so many opportunities available to you right now. If you're willing to open your mind to possibility, if you can be honest with your limiting assumptions, and if you're willing to try something new. I don't think it's a secret by now that I'm spending the majority of my time at Honesty Pill talking to musicians about how they can turn skills developed in 10,000 hours in a practice room into wildly successful and fulfilling online businesses. If you have ideas, questions, or just want to talk about where you're at in your musical life right now, you at least owe yourself a conversation. And if you already have an idea for a business, then I really want to talk to you. Shoot me an email at chris@honestypill.com. Let's connect. All right, that's it for me today. This has been Honesty Pill Podcast Episode 9. You can find out more at honestypill.com. Check out the free resource library. Lots of good stuff over there. Thank you so much for listening. See you next time.